Hey, I hope you like today's podcast, episode number 275 with Tim Dailey. Tim is one of the gurus on battery storage technology for shows. Basically, these big battery systems that are replacing generators on shows and other applications as well. He is really sort of at the point of the sword on this technology, knows an awful lot about it. Started sort of in the core of our industry in sound and lighting and production management and stuff. Really nice guy, very knowledgeable guy. And I hope you enjoy it. And once again, a reminder for LDI, if you want free hall passes, you can use our promo code, which is one word, Geezers of Gear. And I hope to see you there at LDI. Thanks. Thank you for joining me today for Geezers of Gear, episode number 275. And if you will, please join me in watching the following video.
AVL Media Group is an award-winning distribution company that has been established for over 25 years as a trusted brand in the professional audio, video, and lighting markets. Our new state-of-the-art facility includes a beautiful showroom space that is available for demonstrations, training, and special events. This grants us the opportunity to share our knowledge and provide a unique hands-on experience to all our clients. Our large warehouse facilities, both in Canada and the US, allow us to keep a vast inventory of all the brands we distribute. We can get you what you need when you need it. Our first-class team of industry professionals is focused on delivering outstanding pre- and post-sale service and support to all our clients, ensuring mutually successful partnerships and long-term growth. AVL Media Group, your premier North American distribution partner.
And also a special mention to our friend Finn and Santas Roadies. We are now in November, and before you know it, Thanksgiving, and then, of course, Christmas. I know Mike Finocchiaro from Big Fin Productions will be working especially hard buying presents. Many years ago, Mike and Big Fin Productions started a charity called Santas Roadies to help teach his daughters that giving is more rewarding than receiving. What a great concept. Over the years, this annual event evolved from his daughter and Finn loading up the car with gifts for freestyle charity giving to a full throttle event where they were able to provide dream gifts for up to 50 families per year. And as this annual giving all took shape, they were encouraged to apply for a 501c nonprofit status, and in 2019, Santas Roadies was officially sanctioned as a recognized charity. This allowed them to grow beyond the Christmas holiday, and they were also able to bring Thanksgiving into the giving spirit as well, feeding over 50 families their Thanksgiving meal. So if you're looking for a way to help this holiday season, please visit Finn and santasroadies.org/donate to donate today and help make this time of year a lot more special for so many people. And thank you, Finn, for doing what you do. Thank you for joining me today for Geezers of Gear, episode number 275. And if you will, please join me in watching the following video. Tim, how are you today?
I'm well, Marcel. Thanks a lot for having me. I'm enjoying doing this show with you.
Yeah, no, it's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it. You came highly recommended from Neel, and it's funny because he told me how to pronounce his last name. He said it's like the creature from Sesame Street, but so it's Vasavada.
Well, I still get it wrong. So tell me how you do it.
Vasavada.
There you go.
No, he said it's the. You remember the? I think it was Sesame Street that had the guy that went mana mana bum mana 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 mana. So he said, just remember that song and you'll get my name right. And so it's Vasavada.
Well, he's never told me that trick, so I appreciate that because I always hack his name. So I definitely will remember that
Yeah.
when I pronounce his name in the future.
But he came to Sarah and said, you really got to have this guy, Tim Dailey, on. He's really bright, and he's a big part of this movement towards battery power. And so, yeah, thanks for coming on, and we're happy to have you here, and look forward to getting to know you a bit.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And so I was looking through some of your notes, and Riverview, I think, is where you started, isn't it?
Yeah. So I actually started in college. So I'll give you kind of a quick cliff notes on it.
Yeah,
So
please.
in college, I started going to raves, and raves at the time had beautiful lighting rigs, and I really became obsessed with lighting. And so it really just kind of pushed me to wanting to be involved in shows. And so there was a show going on during the middle of the day on campus where I went to college at Chico State. They called them Nooners. And I literally walked up to a guy and I said, "Hey, I want to do this. How do I work with you guys?" And he said, "What are you doing tonight?" And I said, "Nothing."
Oh,
He said,
hilarious.
"Be here at 8 p.m." So literally, Carl Denson's Tiny Universe was the show that was booked that night. And that's also a beautiful show with a lot of great lighting. So I showed up, got to watch the show, and then helped do my first loadout. And that really got me kind of into the production world. And at the time, most of the other folks on the crew were vying to be on the audio crew. So there was always like a line if you wanted to be the guy running the audio console. Nobody wanted to do lighting. So that was also kind of what I liked more. So I started doing that. I also quickly realized if I messed up doing lighting, if the show went black, people just thought it was part of the deal and they went crazy and applauded. If the audio went dark, everybody's looking around like, who messed up? So I quickly learned it was kind of this foolproof zone for me to go in, and during that job, I got to see all sorts of shows. I was the lead lighting guy, lead tech, learned programming. Post college, I didn't actually study lighting design or anything to do with production, was trying to get jobs in various industries more related to my degree. Everybody kept saying, you need experience. So I wasn't getting hired. So I ended up finding a production company in Napa, California that did events and high-end things at wineries up there. Ended up going to work for them for a couple of years, did the lighting gig there, managed some lighting installs, did some account management. Came across Riverview. Do you remember when they did the event production directory? It was the big, thick
of
book
course. Yeah.
that had all the vendors kind of all over.
That
showed up.
That's where I got all my leads from back then.
Totally. It was a great resource. I mean, I remember every year that book came out, it was like gold. I put it in my top drawer of my desk. Anyhow, that came out one year, was looking through it, came to California, started looking through suppliers, came across Riverview, and it listed this big, long Verilight inventory, big console inventory. And I was kind of like, who the heck are these guys? So I went on their website and actually applied for a technician job because that was the only thing listed. Immediately that same day, the GM called and says, "Hey, I got an open account management position. You interested?" And I was like, absolutely. Went down, interviewed with him, interviewed with the owner. They actually took me to a job they were doing I think it was for eBay that day. It was a big production, large stage, video screens, big lighting rig. And so immediately I was like, this is it. I want to do that. And so I ended up working for Riverview for about 5 years. My role was an account manager, but it
when
also
was that
meant
roughly ish?
2007 to 2012 ish, sometime around there.
Yep.
Yeah. And so, I was an account manager and a technical director. Evan Williams is the owner of that company. I think he kind of saw something in me. So he took me under his wing and really started bringing me into some of the larger accounts. And so pretty quickly, I started managing some of the biggest accounts we had there, doing large corporate shows. You're talking 200 motors, thousands of feet of truss, a couple hundred moving lights, big jobs. Did that for about 5 years, traveled a bunch. I think I ruined a relationship in the process because I was gone about 250 days a year.
It happens.
And during that time, though, I really started having, power issues on jobs where, and I realized quickly that, if I wanted to rely on house power, there was going to be risk in some environments. So I started renting a lot of generators. I rented from Caterpillar, Agreco, United Rentals, Sunbelt, kind of think of any of the major rental players who have generators in their fleet.
Yeah.
So, in that process, I developed a pretty good relationship with Agreco, and the guy who was the sales rep there, he actually recruited me. He said, you're one of my easiest customers. I don't have to do anything. You call me with a very specific equipment list. He said, have you thought about a career change? And it was just kind of the right timing. And I said, actually I am. So I ended up joining Agreco, joined them as a sales rep. I focused on the San Francisco Bay Area. I focused on construction and commercial, but I also did about 50% of my business was entertainment and events because I had kind of all those contacts. from the Riverview days. Did that for 7 years, really enjoyed it, really got to learn about the power industry, got to learn about twin packs and tri packs and kind of what the expectation is for the event market. Fast forward to 2019, went and joined United Rentals, left sales and went to a management role there, was managing the power and HVAC business. Managed a couple stores in the Bay Area for a couple of years, did a lot of revenue, grew that business a ton. And then they actually recruited me and tapped me up for a promotion to a district manager. And so in that role, I managed 15 power and HVAC stores all the way from Salt Lake City to Minneapolis, and really grew that business.
Wow.
During that time, I knew batteries were kind of on their way up, but I really got to see firsthand kind of what they could do, customers accepting of them. Had a job site in Kansas City. It was actually a data center. It had nothing to do with events, but that job site, the end customer was a large social media site. And they said, we don't care what it costs. We want as many green options on this job as possible. So of course we're like, cha-ching, we can do it. So we ended up putting about 60 mobile battery energy storage units on that job site. It was the largest deployment in company history. It was the largest deployment from that manufacturer's history. And so for me, that was really a pivotal moment where I realized, wow, this technology is getting close to ready for prime time. And then Moxie and Power came to the scene. They did this big splashy press release, and we missed out on it. I was at United Rentals. Their press release was, announcing that they had a big partnership with Sunbelt Rentals, which was our biggest competitor. So of course we're like, who are these guys? What's going on? So I actually called them kind of on a fact-finding mission to figure out who they were, what they were doing, how they were doing it. They saw my background and it quickly pivoted to, hey, why don't you come work for us? And, I'd done rental for so long and I was so good at it that I really didn't think, a major career pivot was kind of in the cards for me. But after kind of weighing the option, discussing it with my family, I decided, to make a move and leave rental and go join a manufacturer. So I joined them in June of 2023. Worked there for 14 months. Unfortunately, the company ended up, filing for bankruptcy in July. And it was, it wasn't a sales problem. It was really just a far too aggressive growth problem. And, it was, at the time, of course, disappointment was factoring in there. But for me personally, it really kind of had put me on a different career trajectory. It kind of got me thinking about the mobile energy storage space, thinking about, greener power solutions for events. And so despite it not really being the outcome I or anyone was looking for of the company, it kind of pivoted where I'm headed career-wise. And so I'm thankful for that.
So that company, Moxium, is it called?
Moxie and Power.
Okay. So they specifically made battery generators, battery storage units, whatever they're called.
So they made a mobile battery energy storage product. So the thing about a battery is it doesn't actually generate any energy. So we try to not put the generator name on it. It is strictly a means for storing energy. And so what you do with a product like that is, you hope you're in an area that's got a pretty good low carbon or greener grid and use that to charge the source, or you can even use solar to charge that battery. And then you deploy that battery to an event site and power that site for a couple of days or a couple of weeks. Yeah.
And so you said that it wasn't a sales problem, but it was their growth was a little too aggressive, which is very common in so many startups, especially VC funded startups, et cetera. Like the focus is entirely on growth, not on taking care of the customer or making a better product or whatever it is. It's all just about sell as many as you can, grow as fast as we can. And as long as you've got an endless supply of capital coming in, I guess, like you're a public company or you're funded by one of the massive VC companies or whatever, great. You can sustain that sort of pain and suffering, but it probably was pretty painful, especially being there the last 14 months.
Yeah, I mean, it's a capital intensive business. I mean, manufacturing in general is going to be a capital intensive business. If you manufacture in the United States and California, that makes it even more challenging as far as capital requirements. And I mean, it was, VC backed. So of course they wanted to see hyper growth. So that just meant continue rolling and selling as many as you can. And again, it was a great product. It had great market fit. Our customers loved it. We deployed hundreds of them across the US. And, again, it was sad and everybody put so much, heart and soul into it. It was sad to see it go. But, the industry as a whole, I think it made a lot of other people, particularly other competitors, really realize they needed to step up their game. And so that space of the market, it's growing super quick. There's all sorts of new entrants. Everybody's trying to one up everybody. So ultimately, though, I think it did the whole industry a service.
Yeah. So one of the big questions I have when it comes to this type of technology, this battery technology, is like, for example, going back to that social media customer that you were talking about, who I guess it was a data center or something that they were powering, right? Like a bunch of
Well, it was a
servers.
data center that they were actually building a data center. So,
Okay.
and it was a multi-billion-dollar data center. So you're talking, this is probably a 5-year construction project.
Right.
Temporary power needs from the very front end to the very end of that project.
Oh, so that temporary power wasn't to power the data center. It was to power the construction site, basically.
Yeah, that's correct.
Oh, I get it.
Yep.
And so a typical customer like that, a large customer,
Yep.
are they choosing it because it's green, or are they choosing it because it's a better solution?
It depends on who the customer is. I mean, at the end of the day, I always say there's two types of green. You got green money and you got green the environment. People want to say they care about green the environment, but the reality is most people, green money is going to be the most important thing. And in a job like that, we went in on the front end with a great customer saying we don't care what it costs. So we actually, for them, it actually ended up being a more expensive rental. But when we went back and looked at a year's data and aggregated everything over that year, they ended up saving money from reduced fuel spend. They ended up saving money from reduced maintenance spend on the generators, doing oil changes, filter changes, things like that. And then, of course, there was all these added green benefits that are harder to quantify. But for a large social media company, those are huge, valuable assets.
Yeah, the social benefits, basically.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I started an LED company very early in the LED world, LED lighting.
Yep.
And initially it was entertainment architectural lighting, but then it quickly shifted to commercial lighting because we were in so early that there was no distribution in place for regular lighting to be replaced by LED, warehouse lighting, office lighting, whatever it was. And so what happened was initially sales were being made because of the pricing. Like, for example, a fluorescent tube, which costs, I don't know, $2 or $3, was being replaced by a by an LED tube that was $90. And so it didn't make a lot of financial sense. So you had to have customers who were really committed to this green thing, right?
Yep.
And it grew over time to be much more of a financial play where you would replace that $2 fluorescent with a $8 LED. And at that point, it paid for itself inside a year. Like in 6 to 10 months, it was complete 100% return on investment. And so that became a much easier sale because it was arguably better light. It was less maintenance. It lasted a lot longer than a fluorescent bulb. So there was a maintenance cost savings and also safety and all the things that go along with climbing up on tall ladders to replace light bulbs or whatever. But it was also a massive financial savings.
Yep.
And so that made the sale so much easier at that point. But it also created a lot of competition and it lowered the bar to get into the business so low that now you could all of a sudden buy those fluorescent tube replacements at Home Depot and Walmart and all of those places, and they didn't need specialty distribution anymore. And my company kind of went, like it just, we went from being the darling of the industry to being, what do we need you for? So,
and the same is true for batteries. The early entrants were the ones that were willing to pay a bit more, but be able to go to market and say, hey, we're using a greener solution. But as battery technology has gotten better, as supply chains have gotten stronger, as more manufacturers have come to the table, the price of batteries keeps dropping. And so it's not still on par with the diesel equivalent, but it's certainly getting closer.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting to me, though, what the motivation is for the customer. Is the customer buying it? Like, in live events, for example, and I talked with Neel about this as well, there's certainly an argument that could be made for, cleaner air because you're not smelling all the diesel generators constantly, but the sound as well. They try to get them far enough away so that it's not annoying, but you can still hear them. And so, those are some real significant benefits, I think. But then when you get to the cost and the, I know that early on, one of the conversations I had with Richard Cadena was related to the fact that anyone using them was still using diesel backups.
Yep.
And so that, again, it's kind of like the Tesla or the anti-Tesla ads where it shows a diesel van, over repairing or towing a
Yep.
Tesla back to the dealership because it's broken.
Well, and I mean, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do with the batteries is just be better. It doesn't mean it's going to be perfect. And there are still a
Yeah.
ton of jobs where you end up using a diesel generator as the source to recharge the battery. And while that may sound like, hey, well, we haven't fixed anything or made anything better, the fact is it's actually leaps and bounds better because on events, the loads, especially like on a main stage, are really, they fluctuate. There's a ton of peaks and valleys. And so you end up sizing a generator to handle whatever that peak may be. But the reality is that peak may only hit, 5% or less at the time. So the beauty of a battery is you have that there. It can handle the peak. But if your loads are a lot lower, the only thing that happens is the battery just lasts longer. And then
Yeah.
when you do go to turn on that diesel generator to recharge that battery, you're running that diesel generator at optimum load. You're running it at like 80 or 90% load, which is where they're the most efficient, where they're designed to be used. And so, if you aggregate, the total runtime on a generator, emissions, fuel, even when, doing a job with batteries as the main source, generators as your backup and or your charge source, the jobs are way cleaner than just an all diesel job.
But doesn't that raise some eyebrows? When you convince a client to use battery power for a show, for example, and the client walks in and sees the batteries being charged by diesel generators, don't they go, wait a second?
It's part of the conversation because, again, what
Yeah.
we're telling them is, hey, we aren't perfect. We're not saying we are. There's not a big enough battery out there that's going to be able to handle this main stage for a week straight. But the
Yeah.
alternative is you're going to run a big generator for a week straight and have all these periods of time where, say, that generator is rated at 500 kilowatts. It may be running at 5 kilowatts. So, like by a
Yeah.
factor of 100, it's a huge reduction in what the emissions would be. And so, yeah, again, it's not the perfect solution. But any of those jobs where we're using a battery as the main source with the diesel backup and as a charge source, we absolutely have that conversation on the front end. The customer knows, and the sales pitch is, "Hey, we're not perfect, but we're going to be a lot better than just straight diesel."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense. It's just, again, my mind keeps going to this, what's the motivation thing, and if the only motivation, and so you've already talked about part of it, the peaks and how that's handled in a battery versus a generator is much more efficient. But if the biggest motivation always is, because it puts out less pollution or it's greener, it's a greener solution, that's a tough sell. It's always going to be a tough sell, because
Well,
not everyone believes in that.
the good news is, though, that even on the event front, we are at kind of that inflection point where now the money savings is also legitimate. Where if
That's
we go
cool.
look at a job that was 100% diesel and now we've hybridized 50% of that job site, when we go run a post-show analysis, when we factor in the total fuel cost, it
Yeah.
ends up being either the same or the green power solution actually ends up saving some money. So,
Yeah.
and that's the important piece is once we can check both those green boxes, there's no reason why anybody should not want to use that solution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like to me, one of the great things would be, which would get it onto a tour. Like obviously smaller truck pack or, whatever the things are that would get it onto a tour, for example. Well, although tours don't really carry their own generators, they get them locally. But I'm looking for any solution that jumps out and says this is why you would use this
Yep.
thing. And if it's more expensive but greener, chances are, unless you get a Coldplay who says we don't care what it takes, like you were talking about the social media client,
Yep.
whatever it costs, that's what we have to have. Those are still pretty rare these days, I think.
Yeah, and I can give you
Billie
an example though.
Eilish, Coldplay, very few.
Yeah, so there are actually some ways to use a battery without a diesel generator that to get the same effect. So it's something that, Neel and I coined as boost and buffer. So essentially what that is, if the customer has a low voltage, low amperage power source, but they need more power for a show, it's actually a perfect application to use a battery. And I'll give you a real life example. So there was a job I did. It was for another Silicon Valley high tech company. They were producing a show on their campus. I think it was an analyst event. They had a single 240 volt single phase 50 amp service on their property. So that is 2 hot legs, 50 amps each. So that's 100 amps of total power. They went to the producer of the show and they said, hey, obviously we're going to need more power for this job, but you can't use diesel generators. It just so happened to be a producer that I had a relationship with. They knew that I had gone over to this, battery technology company. So they gave me a call and they said, hey, what can we do? And I said, this is a perfect way to use batteries and a boost and buffer. So what we did on that job is we brought in 2 of the Moxion 75600 batteries. We took that 50 amp 240 volt service, split it in 2, plugged it into each battery, and trickle charged both those batteries 24/7. So we were able to put about 10 kilowatt hours into each battery per hour. We then ran those batteries at 480 volt, put them through a step down transformer. So I was able to offer that customer 2 services, one from each of those batteries, and each of those services was a 200 amp 3-phase 208 volt service. So I took 100 amps of building power and gave that customer 1200 amps of usable power. So it was a perfect application of boost and buffer where, we took a very small local source, boosted it, buffered it with that energy we had available in the battery, and gave them an optimal solution that no other product out there could do. And that end customer was super stoked after that job. So it was really a great application of using battery without a diesel genset as the charge source.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know that like Kadena was telling me, I think it was Willie Nelson's festival where where they had a pretty large solar array very nearby that was recharging batteries. Obviously, for a festival, that's easier to do than it is for any kind of a one-day event or a few-hour event or whatever it is. You're not going to bring in a solar farm to do a 2-hour presentation or something. Yep. But so is that becoming more common though, where you're not using diesel, where you're using other methods of recharging like solar?
Absolutely. And of course, it's going to be venue dependent or show site dependent. But, we did a festival a couple of weeks ago called Portola Music Festival in San Francisco. That venue had a couple of 200 amp 3-phase 208 volt services in a corner of the venue, really far removed from the action. So really, in a spot where it was not usable for the show. However, we said, hey, that's going to be a perfect location where we can do a battery charge depot. So on that job, we had a couple extra batteries. And so essentially we rotated the batteries as we needed to. So essentially we would have batteries in that corner charging off of that house power source. We had batteries deployed around the site, food and beverage, bars, vending, VIP areas. And, we would monitor those batteries with remote monitoring so we could see the state of charge. And we would swap those batteries overnight or during a break when there was like an opportune time where we could shut down power for a minute to do a swap over. So in that scenario, we were able to utilize house power that otherwise would have sat there unused. Yeah. We also did small deployable solar arrays on that job for a few of the areas. And deployable solar arrays are challenging because you need to be in a good area with good sun exposure. You want to have south facing. You don't want to have a lot of shadows or shading. And so they don't put a ton of power. But for an area that really is a low consumer of power, like a vending area or somewhere that's selling T-shirts, that's a perfect opportunity where you can put a small deployable solar array. You can essentially trickle charge that battery, and you've got enough power there that you can make it through an entire festival weekend without either swapping it or having to recharge that battery.
Interesting.
Yep.
Which is obviously that's the ultimate goal, right? Is that a battery lasts you the whole weekend and you don't have to bring in generators and fuel and whatever.
Absolutely. And then there's, the manufacturers that are coming to the space and making mobile batteries, they're all stepping up their game. They're making products with bigger battery banks, with faster recharge times, with more capabilities to take in solar or alternative energy sources. They're also starting to manufacture much larger and easier to deploy solar arrays. There's multiple vendors out there right now who are making a product that shows up in a 20-foot shipping container, the 2 walls fold down, and you could pull out a couple hundred panels. So again, you've got to have real estate. You got to have a customer who's okay with you putting that out there. But assuming you have those, those 2 needs met, there's absolutely, scenarios where you can deploy even a larger solar array that can recharge a battery that's doing a main stage at one of these festivals.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So is there some kind of a stat or something that says you need X number of square feet of solar per kilowatt or whatever it is from a charging standpoint?
There is, but I certainly don't know it. It's one of those parts of the business that I didn't focus on too much.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I unfortunately do not know that
I
equation.
was just curious.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I guarantee you Neil could pop it off probably the second you ask
Oh,
him.
I'm
But
sure he could. Yeah.
yeah,
Neil's too smart for me to talk to. It's dangerous. Not that you're not, but I don't know anything about power. So, I just know you plug stuff in the wall and eventually it
well, and
works.
even the solar shading, that was something I learned from Neil on the last deployment. I had no idea, but if you have a solar array laid out
Hmm.
and one corner of one panel has some shade on it, that actually impacts the entire array and how much power
Really
you're going to get out of it. Yeah. And so that's,
interesting.
I'd always heard of microinverters where essentially you have an individual inverter on the back of each solar panel. And I never quite understood the why, but the why is because if you do it that way, if panel on the end is shaded and your panels in the middle aren't, you won't have a downward effect. Whereas if all those panels are chained
Ah,
together, they go to one inverter. If there's solar shading on one of those panels, that entire array is going to feel the effect of it.
ooh,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Yep.
So, what's the core market for this stuff? Like, who are the biggest buyers of this product or renters of this product?
Well, I mean, the low hanging fruit is the entertainment space just because they have really visible carbon reduction goals. The optics of those events are huge. Sometimes they are willing to spend a little bit extra money if needed to get a green solution. But the reality is, the events world is where there are so many generators that are grossly oversized for what they need to do. And again, I
Yeah.
mentioned earlier how you size your generator for the worst case scenario. It may never see that. It may only see that 5% of the time, but you still have to do it because you got to be able to cover for those hits that, when the lighting or the audio is hitting, you're going to go above 400 amps.
Yeah.
And that's really where batteries just completely shine.
Yeah.
Another area where they really shine is job site trailers. So I mentioned earlier the data center build in Kansas City where it was for a big social media company. That job site had like 60 of those big, 8 foot by 40-foot office containers.
Yeah.
Those things have a disconnect panel on the side of it. It's usually a 70 amp or 100 amp disconnect panel. Electrical code states that the generator needs to be sized for what that panel can handle. Again, same as the event world, where the reality is you may never hit that peak load. You may only hit it 5 or 10% of the time. So almost every single job site in America right now that has a construction trailer, they have a generator there that is grossly oversized. So it's another perfect opportunity to deploy a battery and really get a battery out there that can handle the peak load, but has a ton of buffer in it so that for all those peaks and valleys, what you do is you just get a battery that's just going to last longer. So right now it's really construction and the event market. There's also a huge opportunity in EV charging that we can discuss a bit later.
So, explain to me again this peak load thing because, again, you're going to have to talk to me like I'm a fifth grader because I kind of am. But if I've got a 100 amp generator and suddenly it's being fed with a request for 125 amps, what happens to the generator versus my 100 amp battery pack that is suddenly given that demand for 125?
Well,
So what's the difference there?
I'll say any machine, you don't want to exceed what it's rated at. I mean, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
That's like the first rule of thumb with any of this thing. And so what I'm getting at is if we're at a job site and you go and the lighting department says, I need a 400 amp 3-phase service. And I kid you not, every lighting department still says they need that or they need 2 or 3 of those. And when the
Yeah.
reality is their entire lighting rig is LED and they're probably pulling 40 amps. So
Yeah.
you go size your plant to handle a 400 amp peak load. The reality is when you go look at that machine and you go look at the reading that shows you their total draw, they're usually sitting around 40 or 50 amps. However, you have a lighting background, so you know this. If you take an LED rig to white to 100% brightness, that's when you're going to have your peak load. Nobody leaves it at that load. I mean, they're going to be going through all their lighting cues where they're flashing and they're hitting that. So there may be a moment where that machine, whether it be a generator or a battery, sees a 380 amp load. So you need to have a machine that can handle those peaks. But the reality is every one of those machines is usually running at about 10% of that peak capacity.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And so why is a battery better in that situation?
So a battery has the headroom to handle the peak. So if you throw the 380 amps at it, it'll be able to take that. But when you're running at those averages, which is closer to 40 or 50 amps, all you're doing is you're just making the time that battery can run longer because the battery doesn't care
Right.
about the load. It cares about power out. And so it's just when your load is much smaller, you're consuming much less of that battery's energy. And so what happens is that battery just lasts longer. Now,
Yeah.
the inverse of that is when you use a diesel generator, the fuel consumed by a diesel generator is proportionate to the load. However, when you get down to about 25% load and below on a generator, it's the same fuel consumption.
I
And
see.
so what you end up doing is you have this big generator. It's there to handle these peak loads that may only happen for a couple of minutes out of a 1 hour set. The rest of the time, that generator is sitting down there running at about 10% of its rated capacity. And it's just really inefficient. And it's for a couple
Yeah.
of reasons. So, from a fuel consumption standpoint, you're running a machine, at 10% when it's sized to run at 80%. So you're burning a much more fuel than you need.
Yeah.
And then also generators are meant to run at their rated capacity. So when you run them low, you actually cause progressive damage to the exhaust systems. And so, any of these people who own diesel generators will tell you that, they hate underloading their machines because at some point they're going to have to go do a really expensive replacement where they're replacing that entire exhaust system because it gets clogged. So the
Got
beauty
it.
of a battery is none of those things matter. Nothing happens. Basically, if you run a battery low, it just means it's going to last longer.
Ah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I get it. So, the battery basically, if you're running at peak load all the time, you're going to run out of power a lot sooner than you thought you were going to. But chances are it's going to last longer than you expected because you put it in there based on a certain set of specs or whatever. But the assumption is it's only going to run at 10% of that.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I mean, it's
batteries.
similar to
Go
what
ahead.
happened with LEDs when LEDs started being used because, people were calculating the savings based on the wattage of the LED versus the wattage of the light fixture. So if I've got a 1200 watt discharge lamp, that is drawing 1200 watts no matter what, right?
Yep.
The LED is a 300 or 400 watt LED package to produce the same amount of light as the 1200. But the thing is, when you dim the 1200 watt discharge lamp, you're actually putting shutters into it. You're putting dimming shutters into it, but the lamp's still running at 1200 watts. When you dim an
Yep.
LED, you're cutting the power on the LEDs. When you black out an LED, you're actually turning it off. When you black out a discharge lamp, you're just putting shutters in front of the lamp.
Yep.
And so, literally, for a tour, the amount of energy savings for LED is massive because if you figure when you put the rig up in the morning, you're turning those lights on at about 11 o'clock in the morning, and they don't go off again until about 11 or 12 o'clock at night. And they're on that entire time, whereas LEDs are they're on demand. So when you turn the light on, it goes on and it's drawing power. When you don't, it's not.
Yep.
And so battery basically is the same thing
Well, and
in a strange way.
in the previous era of lighting where it was all incandescent lights or arc source lamps, using battery for prime source power would have never worked because you have this
Yeah.
continual high load. And that's always the thing about batteries when I talk to customers. They work for a lot of applications. They don't work for every application. And if an
Yeah.
application has a continuous high load, battery is the wrong technology. Don't even bother. It's these variable loads that have really big peaks and really big valleys where the batteries really shine. And LED
Well,
lighting is a huge part of that.
but again, if you look at a concert, that's happening in a football stadium or something, or wherever it is where you don't have house power, and where the setup is at 11 o'clock in the morning and the show isn't until 8 o'clock at night or whatever, a battery is going to make much more sense than a generator because that battery really is going to be on demand and it's only going to be feeding power when people turn lights on or they're doing sound check or whatever.
Yep.
Otherwise, it's just going to be sitting there, doing nothing. So,
Yep.
no, it seems to make a lot of sense. I mean,
Well,
it's
even
it's
think about overnight at a show. They want to leave consoles hot. They want to leave various racks hot. And so in the previous world of diesel generators, they would leave a big generator running 24 hours a day, where in the middle of the night there's little to no load. And again, that's where these batteries shine because when you underload a battery, it just lasts longer. I mean,
yeah.
that is the beauty of it.
So aside from live shows and corporate stuff or whatever, what are some other markets that are big markets for battery?
Another market that I wouldn't say is big yet, but it's going to be is EV charging. You mentioned earlier, seeing a Tesla on the back of a diesel truck getting pulled down the road. So a lot of times right now when folks are short power for large EV charging deployments, what do? They roll in a diesel generator.
Hmm.
Obviously the optics of that suck. You have 10 EVs over here and you got a big diesel generator over here churning to charge those. I mean, it just at that point, is there even a gain? I mean, I don't know what the numbers are,
Yeah.
but probably not, or it's not very good. So in
Yeah.
that scenario, deployable, dispatchable, large kilowatt hour energy storage units are a great solution because now you're bringing in grid power or solar power from somewhere else. You're bringing it in a mobile form, dispatching it to wherever this EV charging deployment may be, and charging those batteries, with a battery energy storage device as opposed to a diesel generator.
Yeah. That makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah. What about like, my last house, not this one, but my last house had a like a whole house generator because I live in South Florida, and I know Tesla has the battery systems and stuff, but that's not really going to help you in a situation like a storm. It'll help you for a day or two, but so that probably isn't a great solution right now, I would expect, because it'll keep you running until the battery dies. And if you're out of power for a couple of weeks,
Yeah, I mean, in that scenario, you would absolutely want to have an installed solar array as well, because if you're in a
yeah,
situation where you are in an area that has good sun exposure, not a lot of trees for a lot of shading and shadows, and you've got a solar array on your roof, you've got a battery on the side of your house, and you're connected to the utility, if you have a way to disconnect yourself from the utility in the event of like a catastrophic storm where the power is going out, you in
yeah,
theory can have a system that can run your house in perpetuity. I mean, there's a ton of people that do off-grid houses now, and you have to put the investment up front. I mean, you need a big enough solar
yeah,
array and you need a big
yeah,
enough battery. But again,
yeah,
as the price of those two technologies come down, and the price of utility power goes up, which it's
yeah.
going to keep going up, particularly with AI and all this computing infrastructure going up that's taking a drastic amount of power, there is absolutely going to be a business case for every home having, the solar array and batteries on the side.
Well, it makes tons of sense. But from what I understand, and I could be wrong, but I think in Florida and some other states, that's actually against the law. You're not allowed to go off grid. Uh,
And I'm not aware of that, but if that's a state with those rules, that's I'd say an issue, at the state
yeah,
legislative level, and it's kind of it's short-sighted thinking because why not have energy resiliency where
it
every
makes sense.
house,
Well,
yeah, where every house,
it's because the market is owned by a massive, conglomerate company, Florida Power and Light,
yep,
and they're they're connected to the government through lobbyists or whatever it is, or
yep.
payoffs, or so. But yeah, that's what I understand, because I know people who have put in like Tesla battery systems and solar and all of that, but the problem is, like, at the end of the day, you're feeding power to the grid and getting credit for it, but you're still buying power from the grid. And then when the grid shuts down, I think there's some sort of thing where you can put in a transfer switch and enable yourself to switch from city power to your own power, basically.
Yeah, and,
But
and they call it island mode. And so that really is the key to those systems, being able to work in any scenario where you have the ability to disconnect yourself from the utility if they're having issues. And that's a
right.
safety thing because, you don't want to be connected to the utility. They got guys working on the line to get everybody restored. All of a sudden your system starts backfeeding excess energy to the grid. You end up
Yeah.
in a dangerous situation where someone's going to get electrocuted. So there absolutely is a safety reason why you need to have a means of disconnection. But, from a technical standpoint, there's absolutely no reason why every one of these homes can't have a means to do that.
Yeah, I mean, we have so many yahoos here in Florida that they hook up to the dryer connections or whatever. They'll hook a generator into their dryer connections, and they're backfeeding these lines,
Yep.
and because they don't have a transfer switch that disconnects you from that city power system or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. So
But
in California, unfortunately, California always has a lot of green looking forward thinking initiatives. However, there's also, very large publicly traded utility companies that have very good connections with the government. So they actually passed a law, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, but it was called Net Metering 3. And what that means is PG&E, the utility, can pay consumers a lot less for the energy that they backfeed to the grid. It's something like where they're paying you 10 cents a kilowatt hour, but they're charging you 50 cents a kilowatt hour. So what
Yeah.
that did is anybody now who builds a new solar system in California, there's 0 point to do it unless you pay the extra money to get a battery, because what you want to be able to do is store those extra electrons that your solar array produces and consume them yourself, as opposed to selling them back to the utility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. I don't know. Like as a homeowner, I think I've done the math on it multiple times and it just didn't pay. Like the payback on these systems was, 20 years, and I don't want to keep
Yep.
a house for 20 years. So,
Well, and that's kind of where I'm at too. I'm in this space. It's something I'm very passionate about. I own my house. I have not yet put solar and a battery on there. And I did the same napkin calculation that you did. And I
yeah.
calculated about 15 to 20 years, not knowing if I'm going to stay here that long. I haven't yet made the commitment to do it. But as solar
Yeah.
and batteries keep coming down, there'll likely
Of
be an
course.
inflection point where we both look at it and say, hey, this makes sense. It's going to be a 5 or 10-year payback.
So what are those pain points for the battery industry right now? Like, do you deal with the same rare earth minerals and things that like car batteries and cell phone batteries deal with, or like is that one of the big pain points? Is just the ability to produce more batteries and the cost of those rare earth minerals and the inavailability of those rare earth minerals and stuff like that, or
So, I mean, there's a
something?
bunch of pain points, but regarding your last question about the rare earth minerals, so there's really two kind of main battery chemistries that you see right now. One is NMC. That is a battery chemistry that has cobalt and nickel in it, so it's absolutely requires rare earth minerals. There's some people in Congo mining stuff in probably very undesirable situations,
Yeah.
and so yeah, so those batteries that are made with those chemistries, absolutely, there's some issues with that. LFP is actually becoming the more predominant battery chemistry, and that's lithium iron phosphate. That does not have any of those rare earth minerals, or very, very minimal amount. Iron is actually the main component of those batteries. And those are absolutely starting to take off and be kind of the predominant ones. So there's less issues with those and the rare earth minerals. If you're looking at the entire battery industry, really where I'd say the biggest challenge comes right now is legislation. And UL Underwriter Laboratory has specific UL codes related to batteries, related to battery energy storage. Some of these codes make sense, some do not make sense, and depending where you are and what fire marshals you're dealing with, you may end up having a bunch of headache even trying to get a battery system permitted or deployed.
Yeah.
UL 9540 is the main kind of encompassing one. A lot of products out there do not have a full UL 9540 listing. Fire code has now written that into the code. And so a lot of places, unless you have that full UL cert, it's going to be
Interesting.
hard to get your system permitted.
One, it's probably antiquated and so old and written under completely different conditions and whatever. The government doesn't move quickly on some of these things, obviously.
Well, and then another big hurdle really is optics. In the pre-show, you and I discussed this, where when an EV car catches on fire, it's always on the news. But the reality
Yeah.
is, there's 10 to 20 times as many internal combustion engine fires that happen, every day or every year, but those are not on the news. And so it's just this
Yeah. Nobody's
optics
paying
thing.
attention to that.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
it's like, if you look at it in aggregate, those internal combustion engines actually have a lot more issues than the battery ones, but everybody wants to put the battery issues at the forefront. And so really fighting optics is another big challenge.
Well, and it's probably, as crazy as this sounds, ever since Elon Musk bought Twitter, it probably got even more difficult for you because, half the country, call it the left, got really upset and decided Tesla bad, and so one thing you could always count on is more progressive people were very much for battery power and battery powered cars. And I know a lot of my friends sort of went away from it based on that one guy and either his politics or his rhetoric or whatever you want to call it. And so that can't help either,
Well,
because it is political.
it is political, but at the end of the day, it's about using what product best fits what you're trying to do. I mean, that's all it comes
I
down to. And
guess. Yeah.
I'm a
Yeah.
realist. I know that oil and gas and petrochem and hydrocarbons, those are absolutely going to be a part of our energy for quite a long time. However, there are also a ton of applications where using batteries, using renewables, solar, wind, whatever it might be, make more sense. I mean, even looking at an EV, for example, if you're a person that has to drive a long way to work every day and you're in bumper to bumper stop and go traffic every day, an EV is probably not the right fit for you and your
Yeah.
driving
Yeah.
habits. If you're a person that works from home, you go to the supermarket, you go to the gym, you go to a few local places that aren't very far, an EV is a far superior solution for you.
Yeah. It
And so
makes
it's
a lot
really
of
just
sense.
about, using the right product for the right fit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I have a BMW, and believe me, every time I go in for an oil change, I'm ready for an EV because, it's amazing for foreign cars, what an oil change. Like, take a guess what a BMW X5 oil change at the BMW dealership costs. Just wild
I'm
guess.
certain I wouldn't want to be paying it, but I'm going to guess about 400 or 500 bucks.
It's I think it was 760 or 780 or something last time it got done. I mean,
That is
it's
crazy.
insane. It's insane.
Yep.
It's like, what the hell are you using? It ain't oil. Like, what are you putting in there? But
Well,
yeah,
and
it's
if you
just
look at an
completely
EV,
insane.
so obviously you still have to put energy into an EV. So you're going to pay money to the utility or to a charging facility to put kilowatt hours into your car. So
Yeah.
there's still a cost for energy. There's still a cost to get somewhere. But where they really shine is from a maintenance standpoint. There is very little moving parts. There's no oil. There's no coolant. There's none of that
Yeah.
stuff. So if you look at an
Yeah.
EV, you have tires and you have brakes. Like those are the two main components
And
that have
batteries.
wear and the
The
batteries. But
batteries are the scary
I'm
part.
putting those off to the side because they have a
Yeah.
longer shelf life, I think, than most people think.
Yeah.
But you got brakes and you got tires. Those are the two consumables that you need to replace with some sort of frequency. But the oil
Yeah.
change every 3,000 or 6,000 miles, forget about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, and this is probably similar with your business. One of the things that always scares me about EVs is being, in a country road somewhere in the middle of nowhere, 11 o'clock at night, and realizing I should have charged when we were in that town 4 hours ago or whatever.
Yep.
I'm about to lose power completely.
Yep.
And you can't just take your little gas can and walk down the street to Joey's bait shop and gasoline. You got to find a charging station somewhere
Yep.
and then get your car to it somehow.
Yep.
So that's always the part that scares me, is that sort of foreign, and I know it's getting better all the time. There's more and more charging stations and there's, whatever, but
Yeah.
it still seems to be the thing that is a little foreign to me.
It's range anxiety and it's absolutely real. And so it's
Yeah,
definitely,
good word.
when you drive an EV, you absolutely have to get different habits and pay attention to that. And you
Yeah.
kind of triggered a memory for me. Have you seen the Ewan McGregor documentaries where he does the motorcycle trips? So there's Long Way Around. I think there's one called Long Way Down.
I
He
did see
most
one
recent
of those. Yeah. I don't know
and
which
the
one,
most
but I saw one of them.
so he's done three. The most recent one is called The Long Way Up. And so on
Yeah.
this one, he drives from Patagonia, I think, to Seattle with his buddy Charlie. They do it on their motorcycles. This time, though, they actually do it on electric Harleys. And so
Oh,
it's a great film because as they're starting in Patagonia in these really rural areas, they have a really hard time finding adequate charge to get them where they got to go. And there's actually one scene where basically they run out of all options and they
yeah.
end up bringing in a diesel generator on a flatbed truck. It parks and it charges them up. But as they get into more and more civilized area with more infrastructure, with more cities, with more large facilities, they get more and more charging hardware and it becomes easier for them on their trip. But I think it's just kind of a funny film to watch, that progression of going from this very rural area to more
Yeah.
dense areas and kind of seeing the challenges they went through.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it just feels like everybody should be carrying like a backpack with, full of batteries or something, which wouldn't get you through airport security, I'm sure. But
Yeah. And again, though, it's just about knowing what you're doing. And if you're the kind
yeah.
of person that drives a long way and you're in rush hour traffic, EV is probably not the right fit now. If you're driving in town, it's a great fit.
That's one of the things, though, like Elon, love him or hate him, but I think he's a mad genius. But one of the things that he did very early on was all of the logic that he built into the car so that it knows based on where you're going, it's going to tell you where to fuel up, basically.
Yep.
And, all that trip planning stuff, is relatively foolproof if you don't outsmart it. You got to follow it.
Yep.
You got to do what it tells you to do. But, I mean, I've seen some of these charging stations where there's like a long wait.
Yep.
to charge, and I'm sure California probably being one of the worst places because you have the most EVs in
Yeah,
California.
and those problems are going to keep getting eased. I mean, as more and more charging infrastructure and hardware goes into place, there's going to be a point where there is as many charging stations as there are gas stations.
Yeah,
And as supercharging and DC fast charging gets better, and there's more of that, the charge time is going to come down as well. But I
yeah,
also know some folks that regularly do San Francisco to LA, and there's plenty of charging on the way,
yeah,
and they've actually taken it as an opportunity where they know that if they were in an internal combustion car, they might have stopped for gas for 10 minutes. They know when they stop now, it's going to probably be 30 minutes to do a recharge, but they've really embraced that. They take the time to get out of the car, to stretch, maybe catch up on some work, some emails. And so it's really just about kind of shifting habits and kind of
yeah.
getting folks comfortable with it.
Yeah, well, it is different. You can't pretend it's the same. It's completely different.
Yeah.
So, going back to our business, I'm curious about the business model. So, you came from a manufacturer. I'm sure that manufacturer was selling to basically rental companies, dealers, whatever.
Yep.
So, is the customer base sort of like a hybrid, like a Sunbelt or United who rents generators? They rent power systems to people, and they're just going to start slipping these in there and then offering them as an option to their customer base? Or is a bigger part of the market like Clean Energy Solutions Company who, waves the flag of green energy? Is it?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, honestly, a lot of it is optics. They want to be able to go to the market and say, "Hey, we offer these greener solutions. Give them a try."
Yeah.
Some of them, though, like Sunbelt in particular, they've leaned into this harder than anyone else. They have a huge fleet of mobile batteries in their fleet. They've bought them from multiple manufacturers. They really see the future, and they see this energy transition, and they see how many opportunities there are to put a battery out where it's a superior solution to a generator. So it's going to be a little bit of both. But, when I was at the manufacturer level selling to rental companies, we obviously had to go in there with various value propositions to kind of help them see the future and help close the deal. And the reality is, just like an EV, a mobile battery energy storage unit that you're going to use instead of a diesel generator has a significantly lower operating costs over the lifespan of that asset. There's
Yeah.
no oil to change. There's no coolant to change. There might only be one air filter to change. But the wild thing was that was the hardest part of the pitch to get home to these rental companies. We said, hey, this device may cost 4 or 5x what you're going to pay for a diesel equivalent. However, if you look to the 5 or 10-year life of this asset in your fleet and you aggregate your maintenance costs over that time, it's going to be a wash. But it was really, that was kind of, we were at the infancy of getting them to understand that. And so while that was a huge benefit, it wasn't yet fully at like the front of their view of the benefit, why they should go that route.
Yeah, I could also see it being a little scary for companies like that know, like if you go to start a generator and it doesn't start, you check the plug, you check this, you check that,
Yep.
they know those systems inside out. It's just like trying to sell an electric car to a guy at a farmhouse who's got, a Chevy something or other up on blocks in his driveway that he works on. He knows how to fix that car. He knows when
Yep.
a car is making a burping sound, what it's doing, why it's doing that, etc. You're now trying to sell him this fancy new technology that he can't fix anything on.
Yep.
There's nothing I can fix. So when it stops going, what do I do?
Yep.
Whereas now he knows he can get himself out of trouble.
Yeah, and that absolutely factors into it. I mean, these are technical, sophisticated pieces of equipment.
Yeah.
A lot of times the battery packs, they run DC, they don't run AC. They're typically either running at 400 or 800 volt DC, which is absolutely, a dangerous power level that can kill somebody. So it definitely takes specialized training. It takes either upskilling the current technicians they have, or it requires bringing in new technicians that know this technology kind of from the heart out. And so it's absolutely something that they factor in when they're bringing this into their fleet. It's like, oh, great, I can rent it for more and my customers like it, but do I have the means to maintain it? And it's definitely part of the equation. Yep.
Do you see a day and when where there are no diesel generators? Where not that they're banned, but that the alternative is so much better?
Well, I mean, I think there's two parts to your question. So In the near future, like the next 10 years, I do not see a world where it's just batteries. There are,
Yeah.
batteries, aren't going to have enough output or storage. And then B, there are sometimes pieces of machinery that you just need pure horsepower. And so like from a mobile diesel generator standpoint, the biggest mobile diesel generators out there are 2,000 kilowatts. There are motors in refineries or manufacturing plants that are so large that it takes a single 2,000 kilowatt generator just to start that motor. And so there's
Yeah.
absolutely, a ton of applications where there's just a battery, there's no way it can actually handle the inrush load that a big engine can handle. And so
Yeah.
there's always going to be some of those, but as the batteries get better and they get bigger, there's absolutely going to be more batteries kind of inching into that space. I think the second part of your question was more, related to regulatory framework. And
Yeah.
absolutely that is where you're going to see more situations where government, whether that be state, federal, local, city, they start having more strict requirements for air quality, for when you can run a diesel generator, when you can't. And that's going to push some customers or some markets into the technology sooner. In California, there's a state entity called CARB. It stands for the California Air Resource Board. So that entity is in charge of anything with an engine that spits out emissions. They're in charge of managing that. They are making it more and more difficult to permit diesel driven engines. And so as they make more and more sizes harder to permit, there's absolutely just going to be the need to backfill that with batteries. And so on the regulatory side, you're definitely going to see that push some areas in sooner. Like from a federal level, Australia is way ahead of the game in this department. So there's a company in Australia called Mint, MYNT, and they are a manufacturer of batteries, of hydrogen generators, of various green energy sources. And their business is absolutely blowing up. And a lot of it is related to the government there. Like if you're doing a massive infrastructure project there where you're building a highway or you're building a school that's funded with federal money, there's an actual hard requirement that any technology that can be a greener source must be. And so I think we'll see more of that in the US. Obviously, it depends on whatever administration is in there. But regardless of the federal government and the EPA, there's absolutely, states that are more forward leaning. Think of some states on the Northeast, you think of Washington, you think of California, where at the state level, they're going to have much strict air requirements. And that's going to force the industry to start adopting batteries sooner.
Yeah. To me, the issue, even beyond cost, seems to be charging infrastructure. Like, if solar panels could get to, 90% smaller, or, I don't know, maybe there's some other magical charging solution coming from the skies at some point. But that seems to be the problem to me, because if you could more easily charge them, then I could see a situation where you wouldn't need generators at all. Like, why would you have diesel, messy, stinky generators that break all the time if you could have these super efficient, reliable batteries? So yeah, I mean, that to me seems the problem. Like if I were looking at myself as a consumer, if I want an electric car, if I want, my house powered by an electric generator in the event, or an electric power source in the event of a storm, or a show powered by, to me, it comes down to charging solutions. How painful is it? What additional equipment am I going to need? All of those types of things. And that would still, to me, be the deterrent probably. And so I'm sure those things are being worked out. One other question that I have related to this.
Can I just touch on something with
Yeah,
that
yeah,
real quick?
of course.
So I'm just going to paint a hypothetical that is a hypothetical now, but I am confident if you and I talked again in 5 years, it will not be a hypothetical, and it'll be part of the way entertainment and events are done. So right now, think of Coachella. You have a bunch of big generators backstage behind the main stage. They have big fuel tanks that have diesel in it. Diesel is actually energy storage. You are storing electrons via a liquid fuel, and that generator burns that fuel. It produces, power that is then consumed by the stage. A big diesel truck comes in. It's usually overnight or when there's not a big crowd there. They roll out a big fuel hose. They top those tanks off and put a bunch more energy in those tanks. There will be a world where instead of those being two big diesel generators backstage, it will be two big batteries backstage. And there will be a company that has a big battery on a truck that they charged at their facility 50 miles away, either via solar, via wind, via green energy credits, whatever it might be.
Yeah,
They're
that
going to
makes
roll
sense.
that big battery to the job site, and instead of pulling out a fuel hose, they're going to pull out a big power cable. They're going to plug it into those batteries. They're going to dump the electrons via electrons, directly electric instead of fuel. And that all those machines on site are going to get topped up, and they're going to be ready for the next day.
Yeah,
So
that
there's
makes a lot of
absolutely,
sense.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
that
excited for
makes
that future because it's going
that
to be
makes
really
sense.
cool when that happens. Because all of a sudden, you're right, there will not be any of these big stinky machines around that break down all the time.
Yeah. Um, Another question is, I know with generators, like, my son is a racing driver, and we've been in the racing business for a while, which Neil and I talked about. And all of these racing teams, they've always had like super reliable Honda, whether it's a 6,000 or a 10K generator powering their race tent.
Yep.
And more recently, like over the last probably 3 or 4 years, I've seen a lot of these being these off-brand things, that they're buying either on Amazon.com or at Walmart or God knows where they're buying them.
Yep.
But you're getting the same 10,000 watts. You're getting similar quality, it seems. Anyways, you're getting the same amount of sound because it used to be if you got a cheap generator, it was loud as hell, and everyone on the paddock hated you at these
Yep.
race events. But now you can get basically a Honda ripoff
Yep.
for 75% less money.
I have one in my garage.
Is the same thing happening in batteries yet?
Absolutely. I mean, here's the reality. So any of these LFP cells, which is becoming the predominant chemistry for these batteries, is made in China. I mean, every single one of them.
Okay.
And a lot of times people are either buying the cells or they're buying the modules from China. They're then assembling them into their own machine, either in the States or Europe, Australia, wherever it might be. There are absolutely cheaper competitors coming out there that are building direct in China. Now, the flip side of that is batteries actually have grading. There's grade A, there's grade B, there's grade C. And grade B batteries have some sort of anomaly where they're not perfect like a grade A. And a lot of, I think, these up and comers that are making cheaper products are doing them with the grade B batteries, which are a little bit cheaper and not nearly as reliable. The
Yeah.
folks that are still making the expensive ones are using grade A. So there definitely is, I think, some quality concerns with the cheaper stuff coming up. But there will be a point where all the Me Too's that are coming out in the market now that are kind of copying and doing the same things, where their technology will catch up and you'll see a similar scenario. Absolutely.
That seems to be a cycle in innovation anyways. It happens. Like you got the early guys who come in, like you, like Neil, who create a market, get some excitement going, create a product to fill that market. And then China doesn't usually get really extremely interested until it's big enough.
Yep.
Once it's big enough, then they jump all over it, and you have a whole bunch of Chinese competitors, or India or wherever. I'm not picking
Yep.
on China, but it just usually seems to be China.
Well, think about
And
moving lights, right? I
yeah,
mean, because remember how
100%.
expensive they used to be when it was
Yeah,
Mac or it was Martin and it was Verilight, and those were your
yeah,
options. And
yeah,
there's so many other options now that are a quarter of the price.
and they're all good.
Yep.
There's certainly levels of good, but they're all good. Like we talk
Yep.
about this almost every episode on my podcast is technology from the off brand that you've never heard of all the way to the Verilights of today. By the way, Verilight is made in China now. All
Yep.
of the popular Verilight fixtures are made by a company in China called Acme Lighting. And Martin, a lot of their stuff is made in China now. Most of it now is not made in China anymore. They've opened a pretty big factory in Hungary now because they're owned by Samsung, and they've got the capital to be able to do those kinds of things. But
Yep.
it's definitely different. But again, Chinese didn't get involved until the market was interesting enough. And they can reverse engineer hardware pretty quickly, but it's usually the software that takes them a lot longer to
Yep.
figure out and to get it right. Like that's usually where a lot of your problems are in the software side of things. But
Yep.
China's gotten so much better. Chinese manufacturing isn't what it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
When I think
That's
about
for
LED
sure.
walls, right? I mean, remember when Barco was the king, and like that
Yeah.
was like that was like the top tier LED wall that everybody used,
Yeah.
made in Belgium, very expensive.
Yeah.
Chinese competitors started coming up, and now Rowe is the biggest
Yeah.
LED wall supplier out there. They're made in China. It's
Yeah.
run by Chinese, but they have good quality control. They
Yeah.
make a very consistent product. So
Yeah.
when tours want to buy, thousands of square feet of them, they're comfortable doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's an
Well,
interesting space to see that happen in,
it
in
took a
the
while
battery world as well.
it took a while for the LED stuff to get to China because you're right. Like Barco was one of the big starters of that business, but then Korea got really, really good at LED screens, and most of the good stuff was coming out of either Korea or Taiwan early on. And then eventually, China just completely took over and dominated the market
Well,
with
and you
Row
mentioned,
and Absen and Infilid, and there's lots of really great brands in China now.
so you mentioned the software piece a little bit earlier, and I think that's still where, suppliers like Neel and Overdrive Energy Solutions really shine. Because
Yeah,
at the end of the day, there will become a moment in time where nobody cares whose name's on the battery box. They just know it's a battery, that it works.
yeah,
But it's going to be the software and the service that really defines kind of who wins and who loses. And, for all these deployments, what the customers want to see is they say, okay, great. You're bringing me this green energy solution. You're telling me it reduces carbon. You're telling me it reduces fuel spend. They want real actionable data that they can chew and digest and share with all their relevant stakeholders. And so, building a business around having a really robust software system that monitors everything in real time and then can spit out reports at the end that really define and
so
show
true.
the
Yeah,
savings. I mean, that's really where the people are going to come to the forefront of this and kind of be the top players.
yeah. So in your notes that you sent us, you sent me a couple of horror stories. One was a Google I/O show or
Yep.
a Google I/O event.
Yep.
Tell me about that one.
So that was in my diesel generator days. I was working at a Greco as a sales rep. That show was at Shoreline Amphitheater in Mountain View, which is a huge amphitheater. I think Live Nation manages it. They do massive shows there all the time. So the main keynote was on the main stage. There was also a bunch of tents all around that venue. All of the stuff outside of the main stage was all being done by diesel generators by another big player in the entertainment power space. The main stage, they were using house power. And for whatever reason, PG&E, who was a local power company in that area, had some issues. So they're doing rehearsals. The CEO of Google is on stage rehearsing. Power goes out. And this is one of
Ugh.
those facilities where power doesn't typically go out because they've got, I think, backup feeders coming in there. Anyhow, power goes out. So they get a hold of me and say, hey, we need you guys to do power here. Great. So I come down, do a job walk, power the show off of way oversized generators. We do a post show on that job and we realized we probably had 3 times the capacity that we needed for that show. So the next year they called me again and said, hey, we don't want to rely on utility power. We want to do generators, but we need smaller generators. We need a smaller footprint. What can you do? Here's where we want them. So the TD and I walked it. It was this asphalt corridor kind of on the side of the main stage. At that point, I'm not the TD. I am a vendor supplying generators. And I asked the question. I said, like, are we certain the ground here can support these generators?
Ooh,
We're
famous
good. We're
last
good. We're
words.
good. And again, he probably didn't actually even know either, but it looked like solid ground. So he said, yeah, we're good. So a couple weeks later, we come in. I think it was 3 or 4 500 kilowatt generators. I had taken them off the trailer and put them on flatbeds. And the plan was to use a forklift, offload those generators, place them on the ground. Well, it was a really, really tight area. So the only forklift that could lift that capacity and fit in the footprint was an actual, what they call a container forklift. So it's a forklift that's meant to go inside of a shipping container, but it had a capacity of 25,000 pounds. So it was a very beefy, stout forklift. So the truck backs in. I have a technician on the forklift. He goes and he picks up the generator. The truck pulls away. He's lowering it. The entire generator, the forklift, the whole package sinks into the asphalt about 12 or 18 inches. So of course we're all
No.
going, oh shit, what do we do here? TD came over, customer came over, producer came over, everybody's pointing fingers, everybody's up in arms. And I'm a problem solver. Like at the end of the day, we can figure out whose fault it is later and do all that kind of part of it. I said, guys, we got to get these generators in today. You guys need power by 4 p.m. today. That was the agreement. I can make it happen. I had a lot of contacts, so I called, a crane and rigging supplier I knew in town called Biggie Crane and Rigging. They're one of the biggest crane suppliers in North America. My sales rep there is a total stud, the kind of guy that I could call him and he could have a big crane there in a couple of hours. So before I even get permission from them, I just make the call. I knew that was the only way the generators were going to get placed. So 2 hours later, a 100-ton boom crane shows up. They're out in the parking lot doing all their outriggers and getting everything prepped. Everybody's looking at me like, what are you doing? I said, the show must go on. Like, I'm getting stuff done here. So, long story short, they flew all those generators in from the parking lot. It was about a 200-foot pick, which, means they got to pick it from one spot and bring it about 200 feet over. The crane didn't need to be a 100-ton crane. It just needed to be that size because of how far out the boom was going to extend.
Yeah.
So the wild thing was 2 hours later, I mean, these guys did quick work. We had all those generators placed, crane packed up, moved away. Crane ended up costing about $10,000. So of course, at the end of the show, once we got through the show, it was kind of that everyone's pointing fingers.
Yeah.
And I just said, look, guys, it was not possible to put the generators there. You guys told me it was. I said, we do need a bill for the crane. We just won't mark it up. And so at the end of the day, customer paid the bill. It was all good. But it was just kind of one of those horror stories where in the moment, you're pulling your hair out and going, oh my God, how are we going to get this done? But, we got it done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hate those stories because it's one of the cool things about our industry in general, whether it's a lighting company, sound company, power company, we're problem solvers, and I remember during COVID, so many times it came up because I was doing a weekly Zoom call during COVID that was just like a happy hour every Wednesday at 5 o'clock Eastern. And it was just a drop in. Anybody could come. It would be lighting people, audio people, trade show people, whatever, production managers, anyone from our industry could pop in. And so it'd be 50 to 100 people usually. And a lot of times, we would talk about what's going on out there. And eventually we ventured into how could we do shows again? Because we're all sitting here with nothing to do. How can we do shows again? And so many ideas of how to safely do shows like that weren't, these little 8x8 squares with 4 people in each one or whatever it was, like all these crazy ideas that were just unbankable. Like you couldn't do it. It just didn't make any financial sense. But so many great ideas came from all of that. And it just constantly reminds me that if you want something done, you come to this industry. Whether it's, I don't care what it is, it's like 10, 15 years ago when healthcare costs were going through the roof. And I was complaining to my CFO at the time going, why is our health insurance that we're paying for our staff, why is it double what it was a couple of years ago?
Yep.
And I just remember saying to somebody, why don't you just hand healthcare to like Google, give it to one of these for-profit companies that figures out how to knock the cost out of things and do it for free, and just put some tech to it and put some smart people on it and get it handled, and that's what our industry always reminds me of.
Well, and I think in my years as a TD, I mean, when I, TD shows in the high tech world, that was every job there was going to be a fire somewhere. And it was kind of like, how do you solve for it? I mean, I remember having Southwest Cargo, Southwest Airlines has that cargo department. I had them on speed dial, and every single show, there would be at least 2 or 3 drops where I'd have my shop back in San Jose, heading to the airport, dropping a flight case. 3 hours, 4 hours later, it would show up, and I'd have that thing to fix that problem.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's again, it's one of the things I love about our industry, because shit is going to go wrong. Problems are going to happen. And at the end of the day, instead of just panicking and running around going, oh my God, I got no power, I got no whatever, you just go, okay, what happened here? What can we do to make sure everybody's safe? Okay, now let's get the show turned back on again.
Yep. And you just reminded me of a story, though. There was a time where I had a young kid in the audio department. He was an A2. He was kind of working his way up. I had him working like a side room at a corporate gig. And I was the TD in the main room. He kept coming in and saying, what about this? What about this? And I finally looked at him. I said, Antonio, I said, you know what you're doing. You're smart. I said, you don't need to come to me. I said, when these problems come up, just ask yourself, is the customer going to be happy, and is it safe? And as long as those 2 things are met, I trust you to make the decision. And it was like, he thanked me years later. He said, you changed my whole outlook and my confidence. And it was just the truth, though. It was like, what you're doing, be safe and be customer focused, and everything else will work out.
You changed your own life too, because, unfortunately, as business leaders, certainly myself, I fall into this even still after I've been doing this as long as I have, where people bring you all their problems, and I'm a fix-it guy, so I immediately roll up my sleeves and start going, well, I could do this, and I could do this, and I could do this, and it's really hard to just push back and say, Bob, what would you do?
Yep.
John, what would you do?
Yep.
And let them fix their own problem, or our own problem, whoever's problem it is, instead of, because I always find that by solving everyone's problems for them or fixing all the problems, they quit. They just, even in meetings, like, people will not put in any ideas anymore because they just think, well, at the end of the day, Tim's gonna have the best ideas, so he doesn't need mine.
Well, and at that
And
moment, it may be the easier thing to do, but you're really doing them a disservice because, again, like you
and
said,
yourself.
you take them out of forward thinking and problem
Yeah.
solving. And it's like
Yeah.
you want to build a team around you of people that can all problem solve on their own and not just always come to you for the answer.
That to me is management 101. Like, it's one of the most important things is hire great people and then let them do their job,
Yep.
and step aside, get out of the way. And, same thing for the government,
Totally.
give me incentives to have a business and then stay out of my way and
Yep.
let me do my business. So, what else? What have we missed here? Like, so one of the big questions too that I had, even just reading through your notes and stuff, is going from sound and lighting and production and shows and stuff like that to selling power rentals, to me seems really boring. Like, was that
No,
just a leap of faith, or it just seems, I shouldn't say it seems boring because that really is demeaning, but it seems less exciting than all the automated lighting technology and digital audio technology and all that stuff. And now I'm selling generators.
well, part of it came down to a quality of life thing. I mentioned, I think it was
Of
in our
course,
our
yeah.
pre-call that, I actually ruined a relationship because of that. I traveled about 250 days a year. Um, and
Our
so that
industry's
was,
tough on a
yeah.
relationship
And so
for
that was
sure.
part of a reason for doing a career shift, but it also ended up being financial. I mean, I made a ton of money being a generator sales rep and,
Yeah,
I worked my ass off. I sold a lot and I
yeah.
earned what I made. But from a quality of life standpoint, I was home a lot more. I made a lot more money. But from a dynamic work standpoint, it absolutely is a hugely rewarding job because you are out on so many different job sites. I can tell you that I've learned about so many different industries that I would have never known anything about had I not been in power generation sales.
Yeah.
My day could start at a high tech plant. I could then go to a food processing plant. I could then end up at a winery to Google loading a show in at Shoreline. I mean, honest to God,
Yeah.
there were days where I would visit 4 types of customers like that over the course of a day and really get to learn about industries that I really knew nothing about. And I'm the kind of person that really craves knowledge and learning. And I asked a ton of questions. I'll go to job sites that, I'll ask questions about power because that's why I'm there. Sometimes I end up sitting with the person for an extra hour bullshitting about a bunch of other stuff about winemaking
I
just
love
because
that.
I'm curious. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, and also just to be able to be on the cutting edge of this newer battery technology as well. I mean, it's obviously got legs, and it's obviously going to be a massive thing, whether that's next year or the year after, or it's a slow growth or whatever it is. But it seems obvious to me that diesel generators are part of our past and batteries are part of our future. Cars, I'm a bit of a car nut, and I struggle with the idea that at some point there's not going to be an option other than electric cars. I will definitely miss hitting the gas and having that feeling and sound
Yep.
of a gas engine.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
from the mobile battery standpoint, I mean, the growth curve, it's still going up kind of at a slight angle, but it is going to absolutely take off like a rocket here sooner than later. And
yeah,
on the EV front, I think there's a time and a place for both vehicles. I fully understand and respect your point. I mean, when you have a V8 with a really loud exhaust and you hit the gas, there's nothing like that.
it's
But
fun.
I'm sure you saw the news the other day where that electric vehicle set the track record at, I think it was Nuremberg, or I don't know how you say it.
Yeah, Nuremberg, but
Yeah.
100%. So, Tesla one time, I used to drive an Audi R8, which is sort of a fancy sports car. And a Tesla dealership, I just wanted to look at a car. This was, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago. And they said, why don't you take one for the weekend? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, yeah, you can just leave your car in our lot here
Take
and
that.
take a Model S. And so what they gave me was called a P100D. This was before the Plaid. So now they have the Plaid, which is just crazy fast. But the P100D at the time was the fastest car that they had. And I think it was 0 to 60 in like 2.1 seconds. And I think the Plaid now is down to like 1.7 or something insane.
Yep.
And, my Audi R8, which is somewhat of a supercar, was like 3 seconds, or 3.1 seconds. So the thing was crazy to drive. It felt to me like driving an iPhone, sort of,
Yep.
like it just felt so predictable and so whatever. But I mean, when you hit the accelerator and that thing pins you to the back of the seat, it was pretty interesting. It was like, and when you're going 60 miles an hour and you hit the accelerator, it's the same feeling, it's like all acceleration all the time, all torque all the time.
Yep.
And so that was fun. And the other thing that was fun, I took it down to the Keys for the weekend with my girlfriend, and the valet would take my car when we checked into the hotel, and I'd go to grab it the next morning and it'd be full. Like they had a charging station there and they just charged it up for me every night. And every morning it was full again. And I was like, well, this is cool, at no charge. And so, yeah, there were some things I liked about it, but I was really happy to jump back in my Audi.
I mean, the torque is always what blows me away with driving the EV. I mean, when you hit that pedal and it slams your head back into the headrest and you're all of a sudden at 60 or 70, I mean, it's startling. I mean, a while back was at a customer site. They had F-150 Lightnings, which I had never driven. And she's like, hey, you want to take it for a spin? And I was like, sure. She throws me the keys. And I got scared. I mean, because I hit the gas going down that road and it was all of a sudden I was at 60 and I was on like a 35 mile an hour street.
Yeah.
And they definitely take a little bit of used to getting driving as well, because when you let off the gas, they tend to kind of bog down a little bit more because there's kind of that recharge.
Yeah.
And I know you can adjust that setting, but every time I drive one, it definitely takes a little bit of adjusting for me to get comfortable in it.
Well, the other thing that's really cool now is the full autonomous stuff where you literally can just let go of the steering wheel and text your friends or do whatever it is you want to do. Like when I had the Tesla just for the weekend, it was still relatively early stage in that. And so I think it was every 10 seconds you had to put your hands on the steering wheel or else it would basically shut itself off.
Yeah, and making sure you're not in the back in a sleeping bag sleeping.
Or sitting doing texting, which I was.
Yep.
So I mean, it was cool because as a business guy, my phone's constantly going bzz, 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 constantly. And so when you can every few minutes take your hands off the wheel, and I mean, if you're just on a freeway that's just going straight, I'm not too worried about it. Where I found it got a bit sketchy was when there were like off ramps and it would try to take the off ramp or it would fight you not to take the off ramp or things like that. Like it seemed to still get a bit confused. But it's fun. I can definitely see where it's going. I'm probably going to have one at some point, but I'll probably still be a fighter and I'll still keep some sort of a gas car as well.
Yep. In full transparency, I still drive a Dodge Ram with a V8 Hemi in it. And what? I do a lot of towing. I do a lot of work. I have a property, a couple acres, so I'm always going to the lumber store and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And for those sorts of runs, I know that an EV truck is probably not the right fit now. Now, in the future, if there's a truck that can allow me to tow a good distance and carry a good payload with, with range, I'm absolutely open to it.
And doesn't look like a spaceship from the Jetsons or something, The
Cyber trucks are always, I can't tell if I love them or not yet. I
don't
see
like
them out
it
there
at all.
and I shake my head and there's a part of me that wants to like it, but I still have not come around to that.
I'm the same as wanting to like it because I love Elon. I can't stand it. I think it's ugly.
Yeah.
I think to me, it's today's PT Cruiser. You might not be old enough. I don't know. But when the PT Cruiser came out, I remember my friend Randy was like, he put a deposit like 3 months before they came in and he bought it at $5,000 over sticker or something because they were the hottest thing on earth. And, a year later, it was like people laughing at it,
I would say I do remember them, but I don't remember ever thinking they were cool looking. Like I always just remember kind of laughing.
Before it came out, like probably early 90s, mid 90s, I guess. Before it came out, it was like so hot and everybody who wanted to be cool was ordering a PT Cruiser. And I was just like, I don't get it, man.
Yep.
It just doesn't work for me. But yeah. Anything we missed?
No, I think we kind of covered the whole breadth of it. It's the industry is ripe for disruption. That you hear energy transition, that buzzword everywhere, and it absolutely is happening. Certain industries are more, I think, are more equipped and ready for that transition sooner.
Yeah,
Entertainment events, live events is absolutely ready for it. Film is ready for it. And so I think maybe we circle back in a year or two and we see where the events world is at, because I'm
that'd be fun.
confident the penetration is going to be a lot bigger than it is now.
Yeah. No, it certainly seems like it. So, um, yeah, I mean, how about AI? Do you have any thoughts on AI?
Well, I
Are
mean,
you a
I can tell you from
follower?
just an well, from an I am. I think it's fascinating what it's doing. Part of it scares me a bit, but of course, I'm a power guy, so I always go
Yeah,
back to the power side of it. And the amount of energy AI takes is just breathtaking. I mean,
it
they
is.
are an insane consumer of energy, and so the U.S. power grid already has some gaps in it. There's not enough generation. There's not enough transmission, and so as more and more of this stuff goes online, there's going to be absolutely more and more. There's going to be a bigger and bigger power crunch, and
Yeah,
so there's going to be the need for microgrids where folks are actually building their own grids, likely with gas generators, with battery, with solar, all kind of
nuclear,
hybridized.
nuclear.
Nuclear too. I mean, if you looked at every nuclear stock in the last year has gone through the roof because
Well,
everybody's making big bets on it.
Microsoft, didn't they buy 3 Mile Island?
I think they have a contract or a commitment to buy an
I
amount.
thought, yeah, yeah, they
So the
bought 3 Mile, or they're in the process of buying 3 Mile Island and turning it back on
back
basically
on,
to
yep.
generate power for.
And then Bill Gates also has a startup that he's the main funder
Of
of
course
that's
he
building
does.
micro reactors. Yep.
Of
And it's
course he
absolutely going to
does.
be part of that energy transition because it is a carbon free power source. I mean, obviously there's still
Yeah,
the fuel disposal issue that needs to kind of, I think, probably get worked on a little
of course.
better.
Yeah,
There's the fear of meltdowns, which I think they probably have a pretty good grip on now. But
yeah,
I know that's part of the sales pitch with these micro reactors is that they're much less susceptible to kind of those mega events that could have kind of disastrous effects.
yeah. I was going to ask you that. Like, it was one of the questions I always got with LED. Like, before I invest all this money in LED, what's the next technology that's coming?
Yep.
And in LED, I could safely say, there's tests being done with OLED. It's not going to happen. The cost is just so high that it's prohibitive for making light bulbs and yes, for televisions and things like that, perhaps, but when you're talking about just light sources that need to have maximum output at the lowest possible cost,
Yep.
OLED is not going to be the answer. Um, and so there were other technologies, including laser phosphor and all kinds of stuff. But in power, is there any, like, is hydrogen ever going to get legs? Is there any other technology sort of sitting in the sidelines here, going, wait till you see what we've got?
Yeah, I mean, hydrogen will have a spot in this energy transition. The challenge with hydrogen is there's not really a good way to transport it. So, as far as a fuel that can be used to power ships or to be transported from one country or another, it's
Yeah.
really challenging.
Hmm.
There will be opportunities where there are green hydrogen production facilities and people that are very close by can get that fuel. And I think the overall economics of the entire cycle probably will make some sense. I don't
Right.
think it's going to be as big as maybe some people promote it to be. Obviously a lot of people are placing big bets on nuclear and kind of its resurgence. And I think you're going to see some old facilities probably get taken back online. And I think the micro nuclear reactor movement is going to absolutely grow some legs. And then it's going to be battery technology getting better. There's a battery technology called solid state. I know that's one of the futures that people are looking at. There's flow batteries, which don't use a lot of rare earth minerals or even really any. And so I think those technologies are going to evolve. And then really you're going to see more and more microgrids where people kind of become their own power supplier. And I think that'll be a combination likely of micro nuclear reactors, maybe gas and hydrogen gensets, solar arrays, and some sort of battery energy storage. I think
Interesting.
all of those are going to play a part in the energy future.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to it. Not
Absolutely, I
that
do
I'm
as
going to
well.
be around when it all, comes to fruition, and but it's fun to watch. Like, I'm a big follower of all things AI right now. I like to think that I'm a little more informed than most people are. And I use a lot of AI in my daily life, and I'm constantly looking at new technologies in AI. But battery power is another one that, to me, is interesting. You know, I don't know whether it's the end all, but it's very interesting, and I love it, and I love what's happening with shows and stuff, and I really like Neel, and it's been fun talking to you too.
Absolutely. I appreciate the time. Thank you for having me. It's been an enjoyable call, and
Yeah,
definitely let's try to circle back in a year or two and really see where the events business has gone. I think it's gonna
absolutely.
go through the
Well,
roof.
and I want to see what you do next too. So I know you can't talk about it yet, but I know you got something coming, and keep in touch with us.
I will, Marcel. Thanks for having me.
All right, Tim. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.